This is Motor Yacht Red Dread, Old Fort Bay, Nassau, Bahamas. And this is a consignment of rare vintage bicycle parts. What these two things have in common is the price tag. This is a message from the future. The project which I started filming ages ago has ended up turning into something altogether different. This pile of shopping here is a clue to what happened. But before we get into that, let's go back in time to the beginning of the project. This masterpiece was one of my earliest projects on this channel. It's been ridden hard since 1992, but it remains the best Raleigh Dyna-Tech on the internet, if not in existence. It actually transpires from the size of the chat groups on Retro Bike and Facebook that all of you either had one of these or wanted one as a kid. I was firmly in the latter camp. If only I could have afforded one of these back in 1992. I'm very privileged now to be the owner of this one. It's the 1992 Raleigh Dyna-Tech Ogre Titanium. So it was only a matter of time before I took on another project from the same year, the same model year, the same catalogue. This also is a 1992 Raleigh Dyna-Tech. Underneath this rotting, rusty, cobweb-infested, no doubt disease-riddled pile of wreckage, there is another wonderful, beautiful Dyna-Tech with a unique story of its own to tell. Subscribers may remember that a couple of years ago, my cartel of idle Playboy gentleman collectors gathered together truckloads of rare vintage mountain bikes and went out for a big ride and did a bit of a beauty pageant. This one was there. This was actually the cheapest, probably least exotic bike present, and yet it remains my firm favourite. That's happening again later this summer. The same cartel is gathering with a bunch of new bikes that you haven't seen before, and when I say new, I mean old retro vintage builds never yet revealed on this channel, and I want to get this one ready for the beauty pageant. So let's talk about what we're working with under the dust and cobwebs. In 1991, before Raleigh came across its stash of cheap Russian titanium tubing, its Dyna-Tech range was made of Reynolds steel main tubes, or Mang Moly to be exact, manganese molybdenum alloy, and aluminium lugs bonded together. Very futuristic, very desirable. The mid-range bike of the time, on which all these original Dior DX parts were originated, was called the Dyna-Tech Mission, and my schoolmate had that bike, this bike, which he amusingly crashed into a tree in Delamere Forest and bent beyond repair the fork and the frame. My other mates and I thought this was the funniest thing we'd ever seen, he and his dad less so. So what you see here is the 1992 replacement frame and fork on which the Dyna-Tech Mission equipment has been retrofitted. So in 1992, you couldn't get steel or Mang Moly Dyna-Techs from the catalogue, but you could, aftermarket, still get the frame sets. And that's what this is. So it doesn't have a model name. It is, however, a legit 1992 Raleigh Dyna-Tech. Now, the owner of this bike has had it buried in some outbuilding on his immense country estate for decades. And he's so rich and so idle that he can't be bothered to clean, let alone restore his own bikes. So I've said I'm going to do it for my own amusement, but I am, of course, going to do the bare minimum. So I hope you'll agree it'll be quite interesting to see how a lazy, quick and dirty restoration project will turn out. So we'll start with the super basics, the ABC checks: air, brakes, chain. Air, first of all, no, the tyres don't hold air, so looks like we're going to have to sacrifice some inner tubes. 2, brakes, yes, they are completely worn out. The brake blocks are worn into funny shapes, so that's also going to require some attention. But 3, I'm delighted to say, the chain is actually not worn or stretched, which is a huge relief because it means this transmission is not going to have to go in the bin. Everything else, I'm pleased to say, is largely present and correct. The bulk of this project is basically going to be a case of cleaning and tuning, which is just how I like it. Of course, there are some exceptions. These grips will need replacing. Easy job. I think I might leave these strange Johnnies on his brake levers. He put them there for a reason. Who am I to disagree? What else? The tyres, yes, they're ugly, but, you know, they work. So they're staying. This saddle, however, is an abomination in the eyes of every deity in all world religions. Thankfully, Turbo to the rescue. So we'll sort that out. And I suppose the next step is just to get the thing clean. After an hour or so of scrubbing with the muck off and degreaser, I'm delighted to say this thing does not need a total nut and bolt strip down and rebuild, which is just as well because I can't be bothered. There are a few things that it needs. First of all, both the wheels are slightly out of true, so they've got to go in the jig. Secondly, there are some rusty bits that I'm going to have to give a good going over with a stiff brush and some treatment. Thirdly, of course, we've talked about the brake blocks already. The tyres, I've already changed my mind. Yes, they're good, but the colour clash is noisome, so they've got to go. Delighted to say a consignment of pan erasers is en route. This Tioga Avenger headset is all present and correct. It is ever so slightly grindy, but I'm hoping a repack of grease will suffice there. And as for these shifters, they are visually identical to the XT ones on the Team Marin that I just completed, and they're also just as good in terms of still indexing decades after they were probably last used. I think what they will require is little more than a flush out. You can take this screw out here and squirt contact cleaner inside, and that tends to cure a multitude of evils with shifters like these. I'd be very interested to know how they differ from the XT ones on mine. Visually they're identical. I would guess it's probably a case of steel parts inside here where mine would be alloy, and probably about 8 grams in different weight. I am actually going to do the decent thing and recable these shifters, not least because it's such an easy job. That little screw that you can see there, through which you can squirt your cleaning agent, basically you take that out and it releases a hatch. Take away the plastic hatch and that is it. The cable pops out. I wish modern shifters were all this easy to recable. The fresh cable just feeds straight in like this. And that is it. And you just reassemble. It's just a few seconds work. This was a common problem with the brake blocks of the time. You can see that they're a sort of wedge section, which means the more they wear, the taller this braking surface becomes until it's actually bigger than the braking surface on the rim. So what happens is the lower edge becomes a lip. And then of course you end up with a situation where it sort of wedges itself and doesn't pop off again. Anyway, these need to be binned and I've got some like-for-like replacements. These are the catalogue original Rigida Laser 400 rims from the 1991 Dyna-Tech mission. Laser by name, but by no means laser straight. They've had more than their fair share of beating. So this is going to take me a while. Now that the rims slightly more closely resemble lasers once again, it's time to remind you of this cheeky little trick which you might remember from my first Dyna-Tech video, which is this. When the tyre is not on the rim, it's much easier to set up canty brake blocks. And let's face it, canty brake blocks are quite a fiddly job, so any little helps. For a cleanup of this level, I do 3 stages. Start with WD-40 for things like, well, there's some residue here and just grime down in there that the jetting wouldn't have got to. Then I'll use T-Cut Colour Fast, which is colour blended, just for surface scratches and swirls to get those polished out. And then I'll finish with a top wax for protection. There are some chips in the paint. These are the most notable. Thankfully, the lugs are not steel, so they're not going to corrode. And finding a metallic sort of plum-coloured match in somewhere like Halfords isn't going to be easy, but I'll give it a go. Now we get to the fun stuff. I was at Sotheby's bidding for Fabergé eggs and handlebar grips, and these Onza Porky Paws came up as a lot. A call came in from a shadowy agent with a 3-word instruction: money, no object. So I picked up these Porky Paws for the price of a London townhouse, and it just kind of went from there. The original spec seat post on these things is nothing exotic. It's a perfectly decent black alloy Sakai unit. The only reason I'm doing a like-for-like replacement is I need one that's about 100mm longer. The reason being that, like every early 90s idiot, this gentleman thought that a low top tube and long stem looked cool, which of course it did, but of course then found himself riding a bike that was too small. We've all been there. Hopefully this extra seat height will allow him to actually get some power through the pedals. Those red tyres were actually vile. What were we thinking? Thankfully, I have an unlimited stash of these tan wall Panaracer smoke and dart combos, so that sorts that out. I don't tend to have bar ends on many, if any, of my builds. I'm not necessarily against them. In fact, back in the day, we all coveted them. They were, in fact, a great way of parting young lads from their pocket money. But recently I heard an interview with Ned Overend and John Tomac, obviously the two biggest name pros back in the day. And they both pretty much admitted that these things didn't have any mechanical advantage whatsoever. They were just marketing. That said, this gentleman has them on this bike, and who am I to disrespect his choices? Budget hairspray every time. If you're going to fit bar ends, it means you need to hammer out this built-in end cap. And with grips this vanishingly rare, you really only get one shot. So here goes. Clean. You didn't think I was putting those scuffed up budget bar ends back on, did you? Heck no. Box Fresh X-Lite Enduro. Blue bar ends on a purple build. Dangerously flamboyant choices. And of course the Onza end caps. What a finishing touch. Okay, now we're on a roll with making bags of money disappear. When was the last time you saw one of these still in its packet? Tasty. Of course, I haven't forgotten the bottle cage. Say hello to this untouched, period correct, Elite Juicy. These unbranded pedals have probably been on this build since day one. I doubt they were catalogue original, but they're certainly quite nice. Very lightweight, nicely finished, but of course they do little to excite the gentleman with the itchy shopping finger. And what did the pretentious Englishman of the 90s consider to be the paragon of sophistication? French things, of course. Look at these time pedals. Box fresh, of course, new old stock, and from the exact year. And that is not all. We've also got these very fruity shoes, also period correct. And what I'm delighted to say is that the time cleats will screw straight in where these SPD ones currently sit. That is if I can get these bolts out. So wish me luck. Okay, did I say same year? As soon as I unboxed these, I realised that was a lazy falsehood that I could never get away with. First of all, Attax actually came out in '95. Secondly, the paperwork states that these are second generation. And thirdly, this here is a young Cadell Evans, who was not that old. So I would put these at probably mid-90s. Anyway, they're still legit because they're the sort of thing that any teenage us would have put on a bike as an upgrade had we been able to afford it at the time. Almost too pretty to ride. Got the paint from a 1993 Suzuki Vitara, fact fans. Pretty decent match from what I can see. Let's find out. I don't like to casually toss around words like perfect, but that's pretty damn good. In the absence of the original Veta saddle, there's no better finishing touch than a turbo. I don't care if they're heavy and uncomfortable, they look beautiful. And you know what I always say, looking good is all that matters. Some original mint sauce decals at the owner's discretion. Try finding these on the black market. Subtle and discreet. So what started out being a quick and lazy clean-up job has ended up being quite spicy. In fact, I'd say this thing is rather beautiful. It's arguably far less beaten up and, what some might say, prettier than my equivalent from the same year. I suppose all that remains for the comparison is to weigh the things and see if this, the MT2 frame, which is the steel, is substantially heavier than this, the MT4 titanium. There's only one way to find out. Well, the MT2 weighs in at a not insubstantial 13.16 kilos, while my MT4, fact fans, comes in at a gossamer 11.09. Now, I don't know exactly what that is in gammon units, but if you care, I'd say just under 24.5 pounds. So these things were, obviously, there had to be some advantage to buying titanium, but they were by no means light. So as the sun sets on another project, there is of course one final judgment to be made on these builds, and indeed a truckload of others, and that's to ride the things in anger. And for that you're going to have to stay tuned, because next month sees the annual gathering of the cartel where these bikes are going to get hammered. Until then, I always love the discussion in the comments, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this one, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.